The phone rang at 2:13 in the morning, and for a few seconds, I only stared at the screen. My mother's name glowed in the dark. I had not heard her voice in almost 4 years. The last time we spoke, she told me I was selfish for leaving home. Then she said she hoped I would remember that family was not something a person could put down and pick back up whenever life felt lonely. So when her name appeared on my phone that night, I should have let it ring. I almost did. But before I answered, I saw the photo beside her name. A photo from years ago taken in our old kitchen, where she was laughing with flour on her cheek, and I was standing beside her, holding a bowl of cookie dough. My thumb hovered over the screen, and somehow, in that tiny space before I answered, my whole life seemed to hold its breath. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 32 years old then, living alone in a small apartment on the north side of Portland, Oregon. I worked at a dental office, managing appointments, insurance forms, and nervous patients who smiled too tightly in the waiting room. My days were quiet, maybe even ordinary. I woke up at 6, made coffee in a chipped white mug, fed the orange cat who visited my fire escape every morning, and walked 6 blocks to the office under gray skies that seemed to belong permanently to the city. I liked my life that way. Quiet was easier than complicated. After work, I bought groceries from the same little market on Fremont Street. I made simple dinners: soup, toast, pasta, sometimes eggs if I was too tired to care. I watered the basil plant on my windowsill even though it kept trying to die. I read books I did not always finish. Some nights, the silence in my apartment felt peaceful. Other nights, it felt like punishment. But I had chosen it. At least that was what I told myself. I had left my family home 4 years earlier after a fight with my mother that split us so cleanly, I thought there would be no way back. My mother's name was Elaine. She had raised me mostly alone after my father left when I was 10. He did not disappear all at once. That would have been easier to understand. He faded in pieces. First he moved out, then weekends became phone calls, then birthday cards came late, then nothing. My mother never remarried. She never dated, at least not in a way I could see. She worked at a pharmacy during the day and did bookkeeping from home at night. She kept receipts in neat envelopes. She clipped coupons. She remembered every bill before it arrived. When I was little, I thought she was strong. As I got older, I realized she was tired. Still, we had good moments. Sunday pancakes, old movies on the couch, grocery trips where she let me choose one snack if it was on sale. Summers when we sat on the porch with lemonade because the air conditioner barely worked. She loved me. I knew that. But love from my mother always came wrapped in worry. Where are you going? Who will be there? Did you lock the door? You cannot trust people so easily. Do not make the mistake I made. She rarely said my father's name, but he lived in every warning. By the time I was 25, her worry had become a room I could not breathe in. If I came home late, she waited in the kitchen with the light on. If I did not answer a text, she called 3 times. If I mentioned moving out, she went quiet for days. "You're all I have," she would say. And I hated how those words made love feel like a chain. Then I met Ryan. He was not the love of my life, I know that now, but at the time, he felt like air. Ryan worked as a paramedic and came into the pharmacy one afternoon with a cut on his hand and a tired smile. My mother was at the counter. I was there helping her carry boxes because she had hurt her back. He made a joke about being terrible at taking his own medical advice. I laughed. My mother did not. Ryan asked me for coffee 3 days later. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. For a while, he made me feel brave. He was easygoing, spontaneous, always ready to drive somewhere just because the sky looked nice in that direction. He made plans at midnight. He ate breakfast for dinner. He forgot appointments, but remembered exactly how I took my coffee. My mother saw danger in all of it. "He's too careless," she said. "He's kind," I said. "Kind is not enough." "Nothing is enough for you." That was the first time I said something I could not take back. Her face changed. Not angry, hurt. But we kept going. The same argument, different words, for months. When Ryan asked me to move in with him, I said yes. My mother stood at the foot of my bed while I packed. "Claire, don't do this just to prove you can." I folded a sweater too sharply. "I'm doing it because I'm 28 and I'm tired of asking permission to live." "I'm trying to protect you." "No," I said. "You're trying to keep me." The room went still. She looked at me like I had slapped her. Then she said very quietly, "One day you will understand what it feels like to give your whole life to someone and have them call it control." I wanted to soften. I wanted to say I did not mean it that way. But pride is a cruel thing when it feels like freedom. So I zipped the suitcase. Ryan and I lasted 9 months. Not because he was terrible. He wasn't. He was just exactly who my mother feared he was. Warm, charming, unreliable. Bills were late. Apologies were frequent. Promises were sincere and temporary. The breakup was not dramatic. One morning, I found him asleep on the couch after missing another night shift meeting he had promised to attend. His phone buzzed on the floor. I looked at him, at the messy apartment, at the life I had defended so fiercely, and felt nothing but exhaustion. I moved out 2 weeks later. I did not call my mother. I couldn't. Not because I hated her, because I could not bear hearing any version of, "I told you so," even if she never said it. Weeks became months. Months became years. Birthdays passed with one short text from her. "Happy birthday, Claire. I hope you are well." I always replied, "Thank you. I hope you are too." That was the whole bridge between us, thin enough to break under a breath. Then came the call at 2:13 in the morning. I answered on the 5th ring. "Mom?" For a moment, there was only breathing. Then her voice came through, smaller than I remembered. "Claire?" I sat up in bed. The apartment was dark except for the streetlight cutting pale lines across my floor. "What's wrong?" She did not answer right away. In the silence, my body knew something before my mind did. "Mom?" "I'm at St. Vincent's," she said. My hand tightened around the phone. "The hospital?" "Yes." "What happened?" Another pause. "I didn't know who else to call." Those words frightened me more than anything else she could have said. My mother always knew what to do. She called electricians before wires sparked. She made doctor appointments before coughs became fevers. She carried peppermints, bandages, spare cash, and emergency phone numbers in her purse. She never sounded lost. "I'm coming," I said. I drove through empty streets with both hands locked on the wheel. The city at night looked washed out and unfamiliar. Traffic lights blinking over wet pavement, convenience stores glowing like small, lonely islands. At the hospital, the air smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. I found her in an exam room behind a half-closed curtain. She sat on the edge of the bed wearing a thin hospital gown and her winter coat over her shoulders. Her hair, usually pinned neatly back, hung loose around her face. She looked smaller, older. For one terrible second, I saw not my mother, but a woman who had been alone too long. "Claire," she said. I stopped near the doorway. "What happened?" She looked down at her hands. I fainted at work. My anger came back before my fear could finish forming. "At work? It's 2 in the morning." "I was doing inventory." "Alone?" She gave me the look she used to give me when I asked questions she did not want to answer. "The doctor said my blood pressure dropped." "Why didn't someone from work call me?" "I told them not to." I stared at her. "Of course you did." Her mouth tightened. There it was, the old pattern. Care turning into accusation before either of us could stop it. A nurse came in with discharge papers and told us Elaine needed rest, fluids, and a follow-up appointment. She asked if someone could stay with her overnight. My mother said, "I'll be fine." At the same time, I said, "I will." We looked at each other. The nurse pretended not to notice. I drove my mother home in silence. Her house looked almost exactly the same as it had 4 years earlier. White porch railing, blue front door, wind chimes by the kitchen window. The maple tree in the yard was taller, but everything else felt preserved, like a room no one had entered since I left. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner, old wood, and the lavender hand soap she always bought. My old shoes were no longer by the door, of course. My jacket was not hanging on the hook, but a small framed photo of me at 17 still sat on the hallway table. I pretended not to see it. "Do you need help upstairs?" I asked. "No." She took one step, then gripped the railing. I moved toward her. "I said no, Claire." I stopped. Something about hearing my name in that sharp old tone made me 15 again. "Fine," I said. She closed her eyes for a moment. "I'm tired." "So am I." We both heard the words under the words. I stayed that night in my old bedroom. It was strange sleeping there after so long. The walls were still pale green. The white dresser still had a small dent from when I dropped a hairdryer in high school. The curtains were different, but the room remembered me. I lay awake listening to the house settle. Around 4 in the morning, I heard my mother coughing. I almost got up. Then I didn't. That is the part I am not proud of. Pain can make you petty, even when someone is sick, even when you love them. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened. "You're supposed to rest," I said. "I am resting." "You're standing at the stove." "I've stood at worse places." I sighed. She poured coffee into 2 mugs. Mine was the blue one with a chip near the handle, the mug I used every morning before I left. "You kept it," I said before I could stop myself. She looked at the mug. "Yes." That was all, but something in my chest shifted. I planned to stay 1 day, maybe 2. Then I noticed the mail stacked by the toaster. Medical bills, prescription receipts, a reminder from a cardiology clinic. "What is this?" My mother reached for the envelope, but I picked it up first. "Claire, you saw a cardiologist?" "It's nothing. Don't say that." She sat down slowly. "It's just tests." "What tests?" She looked toward the window. I waited. Finally, she said, "They found an irregular rhythm a few months ago." "A few months?" "I didn't want to worry you." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because the woman who had called me 3 times if I was 10 minutes late had kept a heart problem secret for months. "You didn't want to worry me, or you didn't want to need me." Her face closed. there's no difference. Yes, there is. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, years of unsaid things sitting between us like a third person. Then the phone rang. Not my phone. The old landline on the wall. My mother moved too fast to answer it. "I'll get it," I said. "No." That no was too sharp. I turned and looked at her. The phone kept ringing. "Who is calling this early?" "No one important." I walked to the phone. "Claire, don't." I picked it up. "Hello?" For a second, no one spoke. Then a man's voice said, "Elaine?" The voice was low, careful, older. "This is Claire," I said. "Who is this?" The line went quiet. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "Claire Bennett?" My skin went cold. "Yes." Another silence. Then, "This is Mark Sullivan. I'm sorry. I thought your mother would be home." I turned slowly toward her. My mother had gone pale. "Who is Mark Sullivan?" I asked. She closed her eyes. The man on the phone said, "You should ask your mother." Then he hung up. I stood there holding the receiver as the dial tone hummed in my ear. My mother sat very still. "Who is he?" I asked again. She folded her hands on the table. "No one you need to worry about." I gave a short, bitter laugh. "You really think that still works?" Her eyes lifted to mine. "Some things are private." "Private like your heart tests?" "Claire?" "Private like the fact that a man knows my full name and calls your house at 8 in the morning?" She stood, then seemed to regret it. Her hand went briefly to her chest. I stepped toward her without thinking. She waved me off. "I need to sit." "You are sitting." "No," she said quietly. "I need to sit before I say something I can't take back." That frightened me, because my mother had taken back almost nothing in her life. For the rest of that morning, she refused to explain. She said Mark was an old friend. She said it was not my business. She said I was making things harder than they needed to be. And maybe, 4 years earlier, I would have shouted. I would have grabbed my bag and left. I would have turned that mystery into another reason to protect myself from her. But something felt different. Maybe it was the hospital bracelet still circling her wrist. Maybe it was the way her hands trembled when she thought I wasn't looking. Maybe it was that man's voice on the phone saying my name like it mattered. That afternoon, while my mother slept on the couch, I walked through the house quietly, telling myself I was not snooping. That was not entirely true. In the hallway closet, behind a box of old tax records, I found a gray metal file box I remembered from childhood. My mother used to keep important papers there: birth certificates, insurance forms, school records. The lock was broken. I opened it. Most of it was ordinary: old mortgage documents, my report cards, a copy of my parents' divorce agreement. Then I found a manila envelope with my name written on the front. Claire. Not in my mother's handwriting. Inside were letters, maybe 12 of them, all unopened, all addressed to me, all from Mark Sullivan. My mouth went dry. The first was dated 2 months after my father left. "Dear Claire, you don't know me, but I knew your mother a long time ago. I am writing because I promised someone I would always make sure you were safe." I stopped reading. My heart began to pound. I looked toward the living room, where my mother slept under a knitted blanket. Then I read the next line. "Your father, Paul, came to see me before he left Portland. He was not well. I do not know what Elaine has told you, but I think someday you deserve the truth." The hallway seemed to tilt. My father was not well. That was not the story I knew. The story I knew was simple. He left. He chose freedom. He did not want us. I sat on the floor beside the closet and read every letter. The letters did not tell the whole story, but they opened a door. Mark Sullivan had been my father's closest friend. He wrote that my father struggled with depression after losing his job, that he had been ashamed, that he believed my mother and I would be better without him, that Mark tried to convince him to stay, to get help, to tell us the truth. Instead, my father left. Not for another woman, not for a better life, because he was broken and afraid. The last letter, written 2 years earlier, said, "Elaine will not answer my calls. Maybe she believes silence is protection. Maybe she is still angry. But Claire deserves to know her father loved her. Badly, imperfectly, not enough to stay, but truly." I held that page until my fingers hurt. Loved me. Badly, imperfectly, not enough to stay, but truly. I heard movement in the living room. My mother stood at the end of the hall. She saw the letters in my lap. Her face changed. Not anger first. Fear. "You had no right," she said. "No right?" My voice came out strange. "These have my name on them." She leaned against the wall. "You were too young. I'm 32. I mean then." "But you kept them now." She did not answer. I stood, holding one of the letters. "Why didn't you tell me Dad was sick?" Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "Because you were 10 years old." "And later?" "Because by later, I had already taught you to survive him leaving." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. Then, I asked the question that had been sitting inside me since childhood. Did he love me? My mother looked at the floor, and that was when I knew the answer was not simple. "Yes," she said. The word hurt more than no would have. I sat at the kitchen table while she told me the truth in pieces. My father had not been the carefree man I imagined leaving us for something easier. He had been proud, wounded, ashamed. After losing his job, he started disappearing into himself. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, sat in the garage for hours, refused help. My mother tried. Doctors, friends, arguments, silence, threats, patience. Nothing worked. Then one day he packed a bag and told her, "Claire deserves better than watching me disappear." My mother begged him not to go. He left anyway. "Why did you tell me he just didn't want us?" I asked. I didn't use those words. "You let me believe them." Her face crumpled then, just for a second. "Yes." I waited. "Why?" She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "Because anger was easier for you than grief." I looked at her. "You don't get to decide that." "I know?" "No, I don't think you do." Her hands dropped. For the first time in my adult life, my mother looked defeated. "I was angry too, Claire. I was angry that he left me with the bills, the house, the questions. I was angry that he got to be the sad one, and I had to be the functioning one. I was angry that I loved him and still had to protect you from what he became." Her voice broke. "And then you started missing him, asking when he would come back, sleeping with that old sweatshirt of his. I couldn't stand it, so I made him smaller. I made him the villain. I thought if you stopped waiting, you would hurt less." I wanted to hate her for that. Part of me did. But another part, the part that remembered being 10 years old with a mother who looked like she might collapse from exhaustion, understood just enough to make hate difficult. "You should have told me," I said. "I know." The silence after that felt different. Not healed, not peaceful, but honest. Later that evening, I called Mark Sullivan from my mother's landline. He answered on the second ring. "This is Claire." He exhaled like he had been holding his breath for years. "I was hoping you would call." We met the next day at a diner near the river. My mother did not come. She said it was my choice. That was the first time she had ever said those words and meant them. Mark was in his late 60s, with kind eyes and hands that looked like they had built things. He wore a navy jacket and sat in a booth with 2 coffees already on the table. "You look like him," he said when I sat down. I did not know how to feel about that. "I don't remember much." He remembered everything. Mark brought a small cardboard box. Inside were pieces of my father I had never been given. A photo of him holding me on his shoulders at the county fair. A pocket knife with his initials. A stack of postcards he wrote but never mailed. A tiny silver bracelet I had worn as a baby. And 1 envelope, sealed. "He gave this to me before he left," Mark said. "He asked me to give it to you when you were old enough. Elaine wouldn't allow it." I stared at the envelope. My name was written across the front. Claire Bear. No one had called me that since I was 9. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was short. "My Claire, if you are reading this, it means I was not brave enough to tell you myself. That is my failure, not yours. I want you to know something, even if you are angry with me for the rest of your life. You were the best thing I ever did. Every good part of me loved being your father. If I leave, it is not because you were not enough to keep me. It is because I forgot how to stay anywhere, even where I was loved. I hope one day you build a life that feels safe. I hope you laugh loudly. I hope you forgive only what you want to forgive. And I hope you never mistake someone else's brokenness for your worth. Love, Dad." By the time I reached the last line, I could not see the paper clearly. Mark looked out the window to give me privacy. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. For 22 years, I had carried one story. My father left because I was not enough. Now I had another. My father left because he was not well enough to stay. It did not fix the wound, but it changed its shape. When I got back to my mother's house, she was sitting on the porch in a cardigan, hands wrapped around a mug she had not drunk from. I sat beside her. For a long time, we listened to the rain. Then I handed her the letter. She read it. Her face went still. When she finished, she pressed the page to her lips and closed her eyes. "I never read this," she whispered. "I know." I was afraid. "I know that too." She began to cry then, quietly. Not the kind of crying that asks to be comforted, the kind that finally stops pretending. "I thought if I opened that door, I would lose you to him." I looked at her. "You lost me by keeping it closed." She nodded. "I know." That was the first real apology between us. Not perfect, not dramatic. Just 2 words that did not try to escape responsibility. I stayed with her for 3 weeks. Not because everything was fixed, because her heart appointment was on Tuesday, and because the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place where truth had finally been allowed to sit at the table. We did not talk about my father every day. Some mornings we made breakfast in silence. Some afternoons I drove her to appointments and filled out forms while she complained that doctors asked too many questions. At night, we watched old movies. Sometimes she fell asleep halfway through, and I covered her with a blanket. Little by little, I noticed the woman beneath the mother. A woman who had been abandoned too. A woman who had made mistakes trying to survive. A woman who loved me in ways that sometimes hurt, because fear was the only language she trusted. One evening, while I was washing dishes, she stood beside me drying plates. "Ryan was not the reason you left," she said suddenly. I turned off the water. "No? I made it easy for you to leave." I looked at her. She held a plate against her chest. "I kept saying I was protecting you, but I think sometimes I was protecting myself from being alone." The truth of it hung between us. I could have said yes quickly. I could have taken the apology like payment. Instead, I said, "I was cruel too." She looked surprised. "I said things I knew would hurt you because I wanted you to let go." "You were young." "I was 28. You were still my child." That sentence softened something in me. Not because it excused either of us, because it reminded me we had both been standing in different parts of the same grief. When I returned to Portland, the silence in my apartment felt different. Less like punishment, more like space. I framed my father's letter and placed it inside my desk drawer, not on the wall. Some things are too private for display, but too important to hide away. My mother and I started calling every Sunday evening. At first, the calls were careful: weather, work, doctor appointments, the basil plant, the neighbor's dog. Then slowly, honestly, more. She told me stories about my father I had never heard. How he danced badly at weddings. How he once drove 40 minutes in a snowstorm because she craved cherry pie. How he cried the first time I said, "Daddy." I told her about Ryan. Not the polished version, the lonely version. The way I had been so desperate to prove I could choose well that I stayed longer than I should have. She listened. She did not say, "I told you so." Maybe that was her greatest act of love. A year later, on the anniversary of my father's birthday, my mother and I drove to the coast. We brought flowers, though there was no grave there. His ashes had been scattered years earlier in a place he loved, before I was old enough to understand loss. The ocean was cold and gray. Wind pulled at our coats. My mother stood beside me, smaller than I remembered, but steadier than before. "I should have brought you here sooner," she said. "Yes," I said. She nodded. Then we threw the flowers into the water and watched them move away from shore. I thought I would feel closure. I didn't. Closure is not a door that clicks shut. Sometimes it is only a window you finally open, letting air into a room that has been closed for too long. On the drive home, my mother reached over and took my hand. She did not hold it tightly. She did not trap it. She just held it. And for the first time in years, I let her. I still think about that phone call sometimes, the one at 2:13 in the morning. How close I came to letting it ring until it died. How easy it would have been to protect my pride and lose the truth waiting behind it. I think we imagine life changes in big, brave choices. Leaving, confronting, starting over. But sometimes everything changes in the second before you answer. Before anger hardens. Before pride speaks. Before the old story wins again. I answered the phone that night because some part of me still recognized my mother's voice before I heard it. Not the sharp voice, not the fearful one, the one beneath. The woman who loved me badly sometimes, imperfectly often, but truly, just as my father had. I do not believe every wound needs to become a reunion. Some doors should stay closed. Some people do not change. Some truths arrive too late to rebuild what was broken. But sometimes, If the person on the other side is willing to stop lying, and if you are willing to hear something more complicated than blame, a new kind of family can begin. Not the old one, never the old one. Something quieter, more honest, built not on pretending nothing happened, but on refusing to let what happened be the only thing left. My father taught me that love can fail and still be real. My mother taught me that fear can look like control when it does not know how to ask for help. And I learned that my worth was never measured by who stayed, who left, or who told the story first. It was mine before any of them knew how to love me well. That is what I remember now, not just the ringing phone, not just the unopened letters, not just the years we lost. I remember standing on that cold beach with my mother's hand in mine, watching flowers drift into gray water, and realizing that grief had not taken everything from us. It had left one small thing behind, a chance to tell the truth. And sometimes, before a heart can heal, that is the only beginning it needs.